Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's webinar. I am your host, Dr. Jed Applerouth. Very happy to be with you all tonight. We're going to wait a moment as the room fills in. We got a pretty good-sized crowd tonight. I was excited to see that. So I'll give everyone a second to enter the room, and then we'll start talking about college admissions, all that jazz. You guys are in the window where you're juniors. You have junior children, so that is... things are getting real. I'm going to be applying to school pretty soon. Some of you are doing college visits right now and thinking about schools and scholarships and applications. So the timing is right. All right, I see we're starting to hit a bit of a plateau. Let's look around. We get a couple more people in, and then we'll jump in. Okay. All right, so let's begin. So tonight's talk, we're talking about you're juniors, you're applying to college in the fall, and we're talking about early action, early decision, the application itself, grades, test scores, what it all means, building a list, getting the right level of help, writing essays, counselor recs, teacher recs, all that jazz. It's all coming down and getting very real very soon for y'all. And what I wanted to open with is the general introduction of what we're working on. First thing first, we're going to be looking at the process. When you're applying to college, how do you apply? What does that mean? What are the timelines when you're looking at these applications, deadlines, and then next steps? So that's the goals. One thing for those, we're going to be recording this session. It's already in recording. And we're going to send you a copy of this. So you'll be able to watch it, slow it down, share with people you care about. And that is coming at the within a couple of days once we render it and send it out to you. Okay, let's begin with one of the most basic questions. What are the different ways that you can apply to college? And there are many. We've heard about early, but what does early really mean? And the most basic is early action. Early action, there are two kinds. There's restricted. There are a handful of schools who are super selective, who dumped their early decision programs about a decade ago, and instead they have single choice early action. It's restricted. You can only apply to our school and your flagship state school. That's going to be like the Harvard and Princeton and Yale. Those are really strong yield predictors. Like kids who apply single choice early action to those schools tend to enroll, tend to yield, go to those schools. Then unrestricted is most everyone else. And that is, I just tell you a little bit early and you tell me a little bit early. I'm not bound to you. I can go wherever I want. I can apply to 30 schools early. No one cares. It's just a little more information for you to work with, and I get the answer a little bit sooner. All right, then there's early decision. And that is a different kind. That is, it's not a legally binding agreement. It isn't a contract where they could sue you if you default, but essentially you're making a promise, a commitment that if you give me a spot, I'm taking it. And schools yield students almost one-to-one, because for every offer they give ED, the kid has already said, you're my first choice and I'm going. The only real out you typically have without any kerfuffle is the finances, because they're going to give you a financial aid award. And if so, I just can't make it work. The money's not, then you can withdraw from that commitment. Like my sister, she applied to Penn ED, and then she fell in love with Texas. And she talked to her school and the counselors, and she withdrew. And they can't sue you. They can't make you go. They just give the spot to someone else. But it causes some problems if there's a trend of that, or if your high school keeps defaulting on their ED commitments, then they may be less likely in the future to give those commitments. But they can't force you to go to their college. But it really is like you're promising. And there are people who are like applying ED to several places, which really defeats the whole purpose of the concept of ED. But it really is a binding thing. And part of it is you're promising us, we'll take you, and there's an advantage for applying ED. We'll talk about that. And you want to be very thoughtful about when and where you apply ED. Then there are these things called priority deadlines that if you apply and these certain windows, early in, as senior year, within this window, we give priority to these applications, then we still accept afterwards, but we're looking to build our class earlier. So if you hit those thresholds, it's to your advantage. And then there's rolling, where they just keep filling the class over time. And in this case, if you wait too long, you may have gotten a spot in September, October, but you wait and apply in December, and sorry, we already filled your region or your type of person for this major. It's already gone, and so they're filling it. And so you want to apply earlier with rolling than waiting to the end, because they could have already filled those spots. And then finally in January you have the the regular session. I apply in January. They're going to tell me in March or April. Things are very basic. That's regular. So that's unrestricted. I can apply to 50 schools, and then they'll tell me in that similar window. And then I have until May 1st to deposit and tell them where I'm going. So those are the different ways of applying to college. Now, there has been a tremendous amount of growth in early decision and even early action and use of waitlists. And so part of it, we're in this world where it's interesting. The colleges are getting more selective. They're getting we keep hitting these historic highs for the top 200 schools. And there are 2,500 four-year schools, but the top 100, 200 are the ones we talk about, the ones who are selective. They turn down more than half their applicants. And they've all been getting more selective as people are trying to cement their futures and go to a place where they feel like the ground is solid. And so the schools who are selective are becoming more selective. And when you see the schools you're looking at becoming more selective, then you feel less confident about getting in, so you apply to more of those schools. And so then they have more applications, and so this cycle continues. And I see there are some questions. I'm going to answer all the questions probably at the end. Let me go through my deck. But as you have questions, type them in, and I promise as I go through it, I'll hit all of them once we get to the Q&A period. So colleges are struggling tremendously to predict yield. There are a few schools out there like Harvard where if they give out 100 offers of admission, 85 kids say yes, something incredible like that. 80. It's most schools, though, even really good schools, it could be in the 40s, the 50s. And then many schools are in the 30s, and because the kids are applying to 15 schools, and then they're getting more than one acceptance, which means it's harder and harder for them to predict who's actually coming. And because there are more kids applying to more schools, many of them are shifting towards early decision and locking in a bigger portion of their class, so they know exactly who's coming. They know if we give this kid, we know what's our discount rate. Our cost of attendance is 80 grand. This kid's gonna be paying 65. We know our budgets. We know we're getting these many kids from this region, this demographic, and they're locking in a bigger part of the class, which means there's less uncertainty on the back end. And so it used to be early decision was, maybe for 20% of classes, 25, and many schools now it's like 50 and above. And the same thing, early action. It is a bit of a yield bump. We've heard from the schools who are restricted that kids who applied, again, to those Princetons and Yales early, they're coming at a much higher clip than kids applying regular, okay? And that applies broadly, but not with the same level of extremity. But many kids, if they're applying early, there's a higher level of interest typically than kids who are applying regular. So they're leaning more heavily on early decision and early action. And also because kids are applying to so many schools, they don't know. We give out this many offers. We know a lot of kids won't take the offer. Therefore, we have to have a bigger wait list. And so colleges are using the wait list. They're getting gargantuan in certain areas where the class is 3,000 kids total and the wait list is 8,000 kids. So wait a minute. And the melt, maybe they'll lose 300 kids. Part of it is they don't know if they're going to melt kids in certain regions, or they're going to need someone with a certain talent, certain ability, certain major. Therefore, they keep those wait lists pretty enormous. And then they'll tell you sometimes roughly where you are on the wait list, but it could be a number 7,400. And in the past 5 years, they've never gone deeper than 300. You're probably not, going to be getting that spot. And so in some ways, it's like a gentleman's rejection. Not always. Every year, kids get off the wait list, and to some very good schools. It happens when there's the summer melt and kids withdraw. They say, they don't take the offer and so forth. But there's definitely, in this new world order, there's a greater chance of students who are above profile, who have the grades, have the scores, have the rigor, everything being deferred, being waitlisted, or being rejected when there's so many more kids applying. That's part of it too. So all these things are happening. These are forces in college admissions right now. Here's a slide, give you some of the more prolific users of early decision. Barnard is filling almost 2/3 of their class early, and that's incredible. They were in the teens, now they're 2/3. Tulane, Dartmouth, Penn's always been a big user, and they're over 50%, same with Duke and Emory. But this is a pretty big list. I can go down, and some schools are filling 1/3 of their class early decision, but ED has become a force in higher ed. And so a part of it is being careful. BU, here's an example, even in a short period of time, 12 years, they admitted 9% of their class, 1 out of 10 kids, and now it's half. And so 2,000 of the kids are going to be, they're coming early decision. That's a big deal. That's a really big change, showing you with all the uncertainty, with the higher use of more kids applying to more schools, they're using ED as a strategy to help lock in and manage their discount rate, manage their finances, manage who they're actually yielding. And Tulane is nuts. But Tulane, and I heard one of the reps from Tulane, this is now probably 5 years ago, she went to one of our national conferences and said, we are admitting a massive chunk of our kids, almost half, early decision, then early action is the next big drop. We're saving only a sliver of kids regular. And she said very candidly, for the kids who are applying regular, like they're not showing us much love. Like they're really, if we gave them an early, there's ED1, which is I'm applying in October, like it could be 31st and November 1st. And then if they don't get in, then there's ED2, which is when you get the rejection in December, I can apply, let's say I apply to Penn ED1. They tell me no in mid-December. Then I go and lock in with Tulane early 2, for Jan. Again, I'm committing. If you take me, I'm going. And then there's also an early action non-binding, and then there's regular. They said with ED1, ED2, early action, if you aren't applying one of those, we aren't taking you very seriously. And so Tulane only took 100 kids out of their several thousand kids who are going to Tulane in the regular pool, which is, this is an outlier, but showing you some of the thought process. And I've heard someone from Colorado College say something very similar. We're locking down 90% of our class with early action, early decision. So regular is a sliver. That isn't always the norm. It's actually pretty rare, but I'm showing you is the extreme of how people are using early to fill their classes. And also what's known is there is an advantage. There's a mathematical advantage for applying early. And it varies from school to school. One of my colleagues, Jenny Kent, she keeps this incredible database. You can Google it, where it's public facing, where they're showing you the admission, the acceptance rates for early decision, the acceptance rates for early action, and the acceptance rates for regular. And there are some schools where the difference isn't that great, but for many schools and schools who are selective, you see that early decision, especially, there's a real advantage. And part of that, one of my colleagues, I used to, sing in an a cappella group at Penn. One of my friends there, Tom McManus, was on the admissions committee for years at Penn. And he said, for Penn, ED, essentially it's a path that's paved with gold for a school, that we're locking in so many of the affluent kids, the full pay kids applying early decision, because those are the kids who aren't shopping for financial aid offers. They're saying, we'll take, we're going there. We're not going to look at 15 offers of financial aid. And then most kids take the offer. And so they're locking in a lot more of their money on the front, and then they can be more generous. Use that financial aid, use that for need-based aid, but you're locking in more of the full pay kids early. And looking at, and there's also other things, more of the recruited athletes are coming, early decision, other things are happening on the early side. But there's definitely mathematical advantage. And what Tom always said was early decision, it can heal the sick, but it can't wake the dead. That if you are slightly below profile, ED can be the boost you need. It's not going to, if a school wants a 4.1, weighted GPA, they want 9 APs, they want a score of 33 on the ACT, and you come in with a 3.6 GPA, or you have a 1350 ACT or SAT score, then that's not going to be enough. But if you're close, if you're just below profile, ED can push you over the top in certain cases, not always. But looking at the numbers here, so Brown admitted 22% of their kids early and 7% regular. That's a 3x, that's a pretty big multiple. Columbia, very similar. Regular is 6% and early is 20%. Cornell. So these kind of things this is giving you an example. Harvard's ridiculous, showing you how much of a predictor for yield. The single choice kids, they're accepted at a much higher rate than those who are coming regular decision. So giving you an example of how this plays out. But it's a binding commitment. What does that mean? Again, they can't make you come, but also like early decision, they're trying to lock in people they really want, institutional priorities. We want certain athletes. We want more of the alumni kids maybe coming early. That was the thing at Penn. If you weren't applying ED, then there's no bump for you in terms of being a legacy. And so they're getting, but part of the challenge is there's less room for the bright, well-rounded kids at the very selective schools. They're looking for like these certain kids who are going to contribute to the school in a certain way. Early action, apart from the binding, I'm sorry, the restricted early action, like at Harvard and Yale and Princeton, early action doesn't carry the same punch mathematically as early decision. And so many more kids are applying early action now that it's not as, not as big of a factor as it once was. Now it's kind of the new regular for many, many students. Talking to some people in admissions, early action gives colleges more time to recruit you. It's more about enrollment management for the colleges. However, it is nice. I have students I'm working with right now who are getting their acceptances for college and early. And it's, it's nice to find out in October, November, in December, you're going somewhere. And so it's nice for the students, but really less of a bump compared to early decision. And so when you're thinking about applying to early decision, ED1, ED2, it really has to be a school you're excited about, obviously, because you are saying I'm going, and use strategy, but also make sure it's a school you really want to attend. And you have to be thoughtful. And I've heard so many counselors say, don't blow your ED. You have one bullet. Don't go to a school like Stanford or MIT. Like, what are you doing? Like your grades, your profile doesn't fit that. And you're such a big stretch, you're wasting the bullet. So look at a school where, again, you're close or right on profile or right slightly below, and then use the ED. But versus going to a school like shooting for the rafters, it's gonna typically not work for most kids. And also, if you're applying to a school where you really are above profile, and you aren't applying ED or EA, make sure you show some attention and some love. And we'll talk more about demonstrating interest in a little bit. But what they're doing, I've seen more kids who have amazing grades and rigor and scores getting dinged in this hyper-competitive environment because they're not showing enough attention and love to the schools. And they're being outright rejected from schools where a couple of years ago they would have been accepted in a minute. So we're seeing some strange stuff happening in this world also of test optional admission, which has changed everything too. Because when the world went test optional, test scores were a major yield predictor. They knew that kids with certain scores, oh, those kids are coming here, those kids aren't coming here. But now with test optional, but they don't really know in terms of, are we going to be a fit? They're losing data, and it's making things even more unwieldy. And so we're seeing some kids with the right profiles being dinged. So it's interesting what's happening. It's definitely more uncertainty now than there was 5 years ago. So, all right, academics. How will they view my transcript? What's going on there? And this is a slide which needs to be revised, but this is from a survey before the pandemic they asked 220 colleges, hey, what do you care about? When you're building a class, what are the factors that you're using? And it's no secret, grades. Grades are first. They've been first forever. Your core classes, they're looking at your academic solids, your sciences, your math, history, Englishes, your languages. Then academic rigor. Academic rigor is right behind GPA, and they can't be separated, because what does a 3.9 mean? If I don't tell you, oh, it's a 3.9 with 7 APs, 2 dual enrollment, okay, versus, oh, that's a 3.9 with no honors. These are very different things. And for a college, it's what kind of A's and what classes. That's what one of my friends at Tech said, she's a admissions officer, and you have A's. Okay, A's are great, but a lot of our kids applying to Tech have A's. What kind of A's and what classes, and high A's, low A's? Some schools actually show that, and they rank students, whatnot. But A's are much more common than they were 20 years ago. There are a lot more A's out there because of grade inflation and parental pressure and parental involvement. That's and also just competitive dynamics. Colleges really want high GPAs. High schools understand, so they're giving their kids higher grades. It's kind of this thing that's happening. Then testing is below grades and academic rigor, and still a decent clip. It's considerably important, moderately important. Then after that, things drop quite a bit to the essay, demonstrated interest, counselor teacher activities. You can see that considerable importance is much, much lower compared to your academics, because one of the biggest things, colleges are ranked based on their graduation rates, 4-year, 6-year, and kids who fail out, it hurts them. It makes the school look less desirable. They want to have a very high number. 80% of kids graduate in 4 years, 90%. When kids transfer out, fail out, it hurts them. So the first thing is they want to make sure you can handle the academics, not just you have nice activities. Those are great in terms of what you're going to contribute to the school. But if you can't handle the work, you really, we don't want to bring you in. So then their interview is pretty low. Many schools don't interview, about half. And this is no important. You can see things that are important. Their portfolio depends, and so forth. So grades, they're the biggest deal. If your grades are weak, it's going to be a challenge. There is a school for you. There are 2,500 four-year schools, but it's more challenging. I mentioned A's are more common. Half of the kids have an A average, and so okay, I'm going to do that. So A averages are much more common. There's grade inflation at the college level, the high school level, but so again, my kid has A's. That meant more in 1985 than it means right now. And so the same thing, my kid has honors in many places or is cum laude, like that meant more before. That's just, it's much more common. And like at my sister's school, to be on the honor roll, to be cum laude used to have like a 91 was the honor roll cutoff. Now it's about a 97 on the 98. It's showing you how much grades have increased. And in my high school, honors was about a fifth of the class. Now it's over half. And so they haven't changed the ratio. So it's essentially when more than half the kids have honors, then honors becomes meaningless. So it's that kind of thing that's happening with the inflation, kind of takes away from the kids who really were superlative. Now it seems more normal, and so forth. Academic rigor. With grades just going up and up and up, colleges are putting more pressure on academic rigor because they need to measure something. And so AP growth has been stratospheric. The number of APs, the number of kids taking APs, and I'll give you a couple of slides on that. This blew my mind, and I'm still trying to process what happened to my flagship school here. I live in Georgia. I was born in Chicago, but I grew up here in Atlanta. And, I remember the kids getting into Georgia back in 93 when I was, applying to college. And when I started my business, 2001, 2002, 2003, kids going to Georgia, the general rule of thumb was you needed about 3 APs. And that put you on a good standing for GGA. This was their early, their EA profile of the kids who were accepted. The middle 50%, half of the accepted class of the early kids at Georgia, half of them had a GPA of 4.1 to 4.4. That's insane. This used to be, again, Georgia used to be the backup school. Everyone, wherever you're going, I always get to Georgia from my school. This is not in the case at all. The middle ACT, 32 to 34. But what blew my mind in terms of academic rigor, half of the class had between 8 and 13 AP classes, IB classes, or dual enrollment classes. That's the middle. That means more than a quarter of the kids had more than 13. And then, a quarter had less than 8. It used to be 3 or 4. So things have changed. Academic rigor has really taken off. This number, it's harder for kids out of state for the flagships. They've allocated more in-state spots based on, the Morrill Act. These are land grant schools. So they were given the land for the school in exchange for promising to educate the kids from the state. So it's easier for us in state, but still these numbers are mind-boggling. Rigor has exploded. So rigor, but I wrote an article in our last newsletter. You don't want to push rigor too hard. You push rigor too hard, there are too many APs, too many IBs, too much, and the kids get stressed, and the kids don't have fun, and the kids get anxious, or you can affect their mental health as well as their social experience and the quality of their high school experience. So chasing rigor for rigor's sake, not every kid can handle that many APs. And so part of it, at this point now, you're juniors, you're locked in for next year, but just in general, my big push is when I have kids who are in college, like don't take 6 classes, take 4. Don't overburden yourself with these academic classes. Social life matters too. Your life matters a lot. When it comes to grades and grade trends, ideally your grades are solid or improving as you're getting to, as a junior. This is the most important year academically because this is the last full year they're going to get. A lot of your kids are going to be applying early action somewhere, maybe early decision somewhere. And so they're not going to get like these junior year grades, they're the last real grades. And so they matter a lot because you're also in more rigorous coursework. You're in college level classes now. So these grades matter. You don't want to get C's ideally when you're a junior, if you can help it. And here, so a 3.5 GPA can mean different things. 3.5, let's say unweighted. It could mean you started off and you were a rock star as a freshman and things have been going down. Then you have a really a weak junior year and a really soft senior year. This pattern scares them because as you get towards college level classes, they don't want to see you struggling. Then there's someone steady all the way through, 3.5, freshman, sophomore, junior, got it. Then late bloomer is actually an okay trend. where you're starting off with 3.0, you have some, a bunch of B's when you're a freshman, then you have a better sophomore year, gets amazing there, then you have a solid junior year. And they actually like that trend. When you're showing that as things are getting more college-like, I'm showing up, I'm maturing, I'm getting ready, that gives them confidence that things, they're going to extrapolate beyond those points to when they're in college, they're ready for college, versus they're starting to crumble as we get towards college kind of material. So the balance, for juniors, you're already locked in for next year, but you're balancing. You don't want to push rigor so much your GPA crumbles, but you don't want to push GPA so much there's no rigor, and you're barred from the schools, the really good flagship state schools or the good private schools where they want to see more rigor. So at this point, that's already done. But if you have sophomores or juniors, below, that's really meaningful. Additionally, when it comes to like colleges and grades, and you're competing predominantly when it comes to rigor against your high school classmates, your cohort, because the offering at your school may be very different than at some other schools. If you're applying from Stuyvesant High School in New York and kids are taking 13 APs, that's your competitive cohort. If you're applying from the Waldorf school where they have no APs, that's your competitive. So they're going to expect, the right level of rigor based on your class. If you're, coming from Scarsdale in New York, there are no APs. And so they don't expect any. They do expect honors classes, and they count your 400 classes and so forth more. But they're looking at your school, and with every application, there is going to be a school profile. What APs are offered, how many on average kids take, and so you're being compared to your competitive set. Also, within a high school, you're competing against certain bands of students. Their school is trying to maintain gender balance in school. They want to have roughly half guys, half girls. If the girls have a much more rigorous schedule, higher grades and higher rigorous course taking, which they do, and they're trying to maintain a balance in college, then it becomes relatively harder for the girls and relatively easier for the guys. And that is a true thing. And the admission rate is different for guys and for girls. And also what they expect is different. The same thing can happen with ethnicity, and, certain bands of students are trying to maintain a certain kind of class. And so they're going to look differently at certain kinds of students, so have certain demographic groups. So you're kind of competing within these bands. And that is part of the application, which may change based on what SCOTUS does. Supreme Court's ruling in June, North Carolina and Harvard, they may kill affirmative action, in which case they'll have to be more creative in how they do things. The bottom line, academics, take classes that'll challenge you, but you can still maintain good grades, and you prioritize your core academic solids, put your English and your science above music, and other, make sure the cores are strong. All right, activities. Do video games count? Well, I have a student at Northeastern, and he is on the esports team, and video games are part of the recruiting process, talking to the coach up there. So in some cases, yes, but only if you are a superlative and expert. Otherwise, they don't count. They're trying to figure out, again, there's the bright, well-rounded kids who have a lot of things, but schools, especially schools who are more selective, are looking for spikier kids who have, they've excelled in one area or two, that they're going to bring that to the school. For me, my spike was definitely music theater. And I was in at high school, the Troubadours and the Octet and the Quartet and the plays. And I went to Penn and I did just that. And so they knew they were getting someone who was going to bring something to the college. So I brought a resource to them to help fill out their life. So if you're big into leadership, if you're big into, your community service, your school, they require 100 hours and you have 1,000 hours. Okay. They expect when you come, you're going to probably run some community service organization, but they're going to ask you in the Common App how many hours per week, per month, per year. And so filling up the Common App list of my 10 things isn't as impressive as I have one or two things with there's consistency every year. I do them, and I'm growing in certain areas of leadership or whatnot. So essays are a big deal. It's a chance to really show your voice, to become a person, not only a number. And you want to put time into the essay. Some people may say it's going to be 10 hours, 13 hours. I have kids knock them off in an hour or two. It's like, whoa, that's too little time. This is a really important essay. And it has to be the essay only you could write. You don't want to use Chat GPT. It has to be your essay that really makes sense and ties together with your courses, what you're doing. You want to go for a slice of life. You only have 650 words for the Common App versus trying to go big, go more narrow and be more descriptive. And then they're going to have supplements of, why are you choosing this school? And when you do a visit or do a deep dive into them, you really can show you care about the school. So it's a chance for you to make a narrative, tie things together. It's a very important essay, your core essay, and also your supplements. We partner with a lot of phenomenal consultants from ICA and HECA and other independents. If you need help with essays, Applerouth, we don't do that, but we have names if you want support or help with that process. They also help with the application and building a list. Our lane is academics, GPA, and testing, but we have peers and colleagues who help our students with the other pieces. Rex, but I can talk about the whole piece because I've been doing this for 21 years and I've seen quite a few of kids go through and apply to college. Recommendations. You want to ask your teachers early, ask thoughtfully, be careful. You don't want someone to bang out a boilerplate app. They can see through that from a mile away. You want them to know you, to be able to go to bat for you, take time on you. So don't pick the teacher where you have the highest GPA per se, but the one where they really know you. You've interacted with them, maybe even you've struggled but came through. They've seen your curiosity, your growth. Make their job easier. Give them a transcript of what you've done in their class, outside. They have a lot of students, and so to make it easier versus them going back through their grading reports, just, hey, I did a thing with you. I did this project. I make it easy for them to write a good rec. So give them, also do it early. Ask them earlier, like at the end of junior year. Don't wait until the fall. When they're crazy crush writing 100, ask them when they have some time, it's more spacious, and so forth. All right, DI, demonstrating interest. Why do I go on visits? Why do I go to the college fairs? Why show up when they come to high school? Well, they're going to be counting and measuring your level of engagement. When I say they, colleges, with the exception of the very, very, very top selectives, Harvard doesn't care if you show interest. They know, again, they yield 85% of kids. They're not worried. MIT, Stanford, the top schools, but many schools look closely at this. They're trying, the schools who yield in the 35, 45 percentile, they're trying to figure out, will you come? The school like Drexel, their yield rate's like 10%, 8%. They have to give out 16 offers. They get one kid to show. So if you're actually showing up and doing a tour, there's a much higher likelihood you'll actually go if we give you an offer. You aren't just applying to 20 schools randomly on the Common App, like 20 apps out. So exceptional contact, you're interviewing with an alum, or you're going, or with the admissions office, if you go and do a tour, you're showing up, you're talking with the faculty. Medium engagement, campus tour, info session, visit high school, college fair. And then low is very minimal. And then there are like the phantom applicants, where there's nothing. They have a record of every touch point with the school, and there's nothing. And those, again, they don't know, are you applying to 20 schools? Are we just anywhere? The odds of getting in, if you have no engagement, they're very low. With the exception of the schools who yield everyone, they just look at you with your insane grades and you wrote a book, and they'll take you for those schools. But schools, they are paying attention to your analog engagement activity as well as your digital. They're going to see, it's very simple now. There's a digital beacon, a single pixel, which pings back to the server for every email they send you. It says, did you open the email? If you hit a link, it tracks where it takes you to the site. They track how long you spent on the site, where you went. Everybody has this. This is basic. If you're using, SurveyMonkey or whatever, any kind of MailChimp, this is basic. It's free, essentially. To tracking open rates, bounce rates, clicks, engagement. They can measure all of this. So this is not if they send you an email, they know if you just sign up for the list and you aren't looking at their emails, that doesn't get you much. Most of the schools are using a system called Slate. Slate and Score, and it allows you to track engagement instantly without any human involvement. And it's going to show you open rates for emails, how long you spent, and it's going to an event you attended, other activities, interactions, and they're going to be able to score you very quickly. Again, some schools will use it low, medium, high, others make it a numeric, but they're going to track easily your level of engagement with the school. And when the student is engaging with admissions officer, they're emailing, sending they're tracking all of that. They know when you're engaging with the school. They're trying to figure out, are you serious about us or not? DI is important, and do your homework. Be ready to engage with them. Open emails, go on their websites, follow them. It doesn't matter for the hyperselectives that there are many schools who are not hyperselective. Also, the essay supplements. Why are you applying to Barnard? Why do you think academically you'll be a fit at USC? That's a way also, if you showed up, did a tour, really engage with them, as a way to show that you care about them. You aren't giving some generic, here's your brochure back to you, which they know their brochure. All right, interviews. matter for some, like when Awake went test optional, they required an interview, and they're short and sweet, 20 minutes. You don't, it's fine to interview. Like I have a bunch of friends who do the alumni interviews. They don't count for that much, but it's a chance for you to engage, talk, find out. They're making sure you're respectable and respectful, and you show up, make sure you ask questions. They're gonna, the alumni interviews don't count that much unless you really shank it. But it's a way for you to engage, ask questions, show interest in them, write a thank you note, so forth. And for certain things, the interview matters a lot more, like for certain scholarships, Thomas Jefferson at UVA, those, the interview matters a lot more. They're trying to really whittle down and trying to get a sense of character and so forth. When you are applying, be mindful as you're building your list that you actually could help them put a flag in a state or a certain demographic or a certain activity. They want a level of diversity for their schools. They want a level of gender diversity for certain schools. As a male applying, I get a pop. Other schools, as a female applying to this program, I get a pop. There aren't that many computer science people in the school. I'm a female, so they have only a fourth of the students. I'm diverse for that program. Racial balance, ethnic balance, for sure, that's a factor. In terms of first generation, they want more first gen kids, trying to create more access, more openness and inclusion. Geographic balance is really a factor. It's much easier to get into Penn from, let's say, Atlanta than from the tri-state area, from Jersey or Connecticut or New York. There's more kids applying. The same thing as it's much easier getting in to Northwestern if you are from Wyoming than if you're from New Trier High School on the North Shore of Chicago. There are just that many more kids applying down the street, but there aren't as many kids applying from Idaho or from Wyoming or from Hawaii. So you could, provide some diversity in that regard, even though you'll think of yourself as a diverse kind of person. So be mindful of diversity in that regard. Okay, this is an important factor. Your juniors, I had a talk with a friend of mine about 3 days ago, and her daughter is now currently in a gap year. She graduated a year ago, and she's not in college because they did not build a list thinking about financial fit. They were letting their daughter apply to all these schools, great schools, aspirational schools. I've always wanted to go to this school or that school in this city, New York, wherever. She got into like 7 schools. They couldn't afford any of them. And now she's taking a gap year, doing some work, doing some classes. She's applying again with a very, very different list. And so you have to think about finances and fit and tell your kids, like, what are the realities? Because if cost of attendance is 80 grand a year, that's $320,000 plus travel, call it 340. That's after tax dollars, and you have 3 kids. That's $1 million. Do we have $1 million in it, or am I going to saddle you with a bunch of student debt? And what is that? If we're not going to be able to get financial need-based aid, can we get merit-based aid? And what schools give merit-based aid? And it's important that kids, I think, are included in the conversation, because it could be, this school only, it works if and only if, like Tulane works only if they give us 30 grand of grant aid or need-based aid. Otherwise, Tulane is 80 grand a year. You don't have that. I think it's fair to kids versus dashing their hopes, like apply everywhere and see where it goes, and then saying we can't afford it after the fact. So to me, it's important to bring that to the front of the conversation and looking for fits academically, fits socially, but also fits financially. So I felt really bad for my friend and her daughter. I think it really wasn't fair that they didn't think this through on the front end and really think about merit-based aid and so forth. So when it comes to tuition, college is more expensive. My mom went to school. It was, her education was $250 a semester at Florida. My sister went to school back in '91 at UT Austin, and say tuition. She was spending, it was like $5,000. It was nothing. And say tuition was so cheap. It was a couple grand a year for her. And then she, got into Harvard Law School and Duke Law School. But in-state tuition at a public school was so cheap. Now it's gotten more expensive. Student debt is now about $1.8 trillion. It's a lot. And a lot of people are worried about the debt level. Admissions directors think that they're losing applicants because of the student debt. And so also be smart that we're in this world called high tuition, high discount. That for first-year kids, a private school going to a private college, the average discount for a first-year student is 45%. So if tuition is $50,000 at a private school, a lot of people aren't paying anywhere near that. There are some who are full pay, but there are a lot of kids getting some aid and some kids getting very meaningful aid. If the average student of that class is paying only $26,000. So that tells you there's a lot of aid going out. So three-fourths of schools are using merit-based aid. And there's some pushback. There are some schools that are doing much flatter pricing, where we're saying our price is not $58,000. On average, kids are paying $30,000. You know what? Our price is $30,000, period. And we have value. We're not going to do this big song and dance. But there still is a lot of the song and dance and the reason they're doing this customer segmentation, like think about an airplane, where the majority of profit comes from first class and business class. Then everyone else is kind of break even, but they're getting so much money from the small group of people who are paying 3x, 4x for the same seats. It's similar things happening. This whole, it's called dynamic pricing. And so college is all about this. So there are some people paying the full 80 grand for tuition. They're less price sensitive. They're not going to get need-based aid. Then you have the Pell Grant students, that super high need kids who are getting a lot of need-based aid. So maybe their estimated family contribution is $10,000, but they're getting $70,000 met by the school. Then what's challenging is for the middle class, even upper middle, where they're getting the squeeze. They're not going to be eligible for the Pell Grant. They're not going to be eligible for the heavy need-based aid, and they're not so affluent where they have all this disposable income around where they can spend $250,000 per kid for college. They're the ones who really need a good package, a good financial aid offer. And they're the ones who often aren't applying early decision because they need to apply to 5 or 6 schools and get a good, solid award because we've saved up. We can pay $40,000 a year, but not $70,000. And so, the award letter matters. And we don't want to give you, honey, $30,000 in student debt each year. And then you owe $100,000, which you'll be paying off for 15 years. Which may delay you getting a house, getting married, having kids. It may change your ability to be an entrepreneur or change jobs because you owe all this debt, which is real. I have friends paying off student debt at 40, 45. And so this is really a factor. And the real deals are undergrad. Once you're going for your master's, or everyone's, we're all in the same boat, but undergrad is where the deals are, it's where the money is. So be mindful of this when you're looking, but also understand there's high discounts. And so don't just see sticker price and say, I cannot have that money. Go and look at the net price calculator on their website. If they receive federal dollars, they have to have an NPC. Some of them are buried on page 6. Some of them is front and center. We type in your income and they say, okay, for a student, if you're pulling in $180 a year, on average, you're going to have to pay $48,000 a year for our school. Even though our top price is $70,000, you're going to pay $48,000. Typically, there's going to be $80,000 in grant. Work study for $5,000. There'll be other, Stafford loans. They're going to figure out how to make it work. But go and look online. Don't just see the price and freak out. Okay. All right. Merit scholarships. That's one of the things that we do at Applerouth. We help kids get merit scholarships through getting them higher GPAs and higher test scores. Those are the things that we do as a company. And merit money is powerful. Merit money can change schools completely. Alabama, you wouldn't believe their academic profile. I was blown away. They were a total backup school. It doesn't hurt to win football games and be a very attractive place that way because it's fun and kids want to go and see their teams win and watch Nick Saban's team, crush everyone else in most cases. But apart from that, they have used merit money like you wouldn't believe. They're giving out money left and right, and their incoming freshman class is like 40+% out of state. They're pulling kids from Cornell who are going to Alabama full ride for free, and then they go to Cornell for grad school. And the average GPA has gone through the roof. Their average number of their testing has gone up. It's incredible. Same thing. I live in Georgia. We have something called it's a merit scholarship called the Hope Scholarship, where if you have a 3.0 GPA, or if you want the full ride, it's like a 3.7 GPA and a 1200 or a 26 ACT. You get the Zell Miller Scholarship, and tuition is free. And free, okay, I'm looking at Kenyon at 58,000 or zero. Zero is kind of compelling for a lot of kids. And so what's happened is Georgia went from being a backup to those numbers I showed you before. Georgia is a powerhouse. It's like a public Ivy. But when I apply, when I was looking at school in 93, our kids with C's were going to Georgia. Our kids with 950 ST scores were going to Georgia. That is, Zell Miller, the Hope Scholarship has changed all of it. So merit aid can change a school. Essentially, you buy smart kids who then become smart alums, and then they start giving at a higher clip. So they're making an investment. I'll knock off $30,000 a year tuition now, but you'll probably give it back to me over a lifetime or with endowments or grants or big gifts and so forth. I'll leave my camera back. All right, so they're using the resources. Here's the example. My niece just did this last year. She applied from Midlothian, Richmond, Virginia. She got a 1390 on the SAT. She applied to South Carolina and Tulane, Georgia, Alabama. Because of her, she has a 3.5. So does everyone that has 3.5. 1390. That put her in the UA Scholar. That knocked tuition down from 30 grand from Virginia down to $6,000. That's meaningful. They offered her $96,000 in merit-based aid, not from need-based aid, it's from merit. And there are many schools who offer these kind of, offers, these kind of, policies. And so that's where we help kids get test scores and grades, and then they're eligible for these bigger rewards, millions per year. All right, trends in admission, big things. You may have heard application numbers 846. How does that happen to me? I need more time. It's amazing. Apps are way up. Perceived scarcity is self-reinforcing. It's more kids are applying. And so the question for some is 20 the new 10, where the kids apply to the normal 10 schools with their foundational schools, their very likelies and their reaches. Then they swing for the fences 10. Why not apply to these schools? Because you know what? But used to be the test score was a limiting factor. That was the governor's screw. I don't have a 1550. I'm not applying to, to Stanford, but now it's just optional. So that, the governor screws off, kids are applying everywhere. It's making the selectives hyper selective. That's part of the challenge. So more apps, selectives, more kids applying, way up. I'm going to speed up because I realize I've just been talking. I have so many slides, but it's all important information. This could be a 3-hour talk. You can probably tell there's just so much behind this. So the volume is way up for selectives. And here's a few examples, pre-pandemic and post. Look what happened to MIT and Emory and Duke. I remember Duke was 30% acceptance rate. Now it's 4%. UVA, Northeastern, 20% to 6.5%. That's nuts. Testing, that's one of our foundations. If you're a junior, you're still in the window for the SAT or the ACT. They overlap roughly 80%. They're very, very similar. They are changing for the digital SAT. That won't affect any of you. That'll affect sophomores and freshmen, not juniors. The ACT is much speedier. You have a lot more time on the SAT. And then super scoring happens automatically for the ACT. They take your very best sections and smash them together and send those off automatically. Here's super scoring. My top verbal was from March. From June. My top math was from March. Together, they combine them, and that's my super score. The majority of schools super score the SAT, and many, many, many super score the ACT. You can go on College Board and find out if your school does. Many schools also let you self-report scores. They're not going to ask for an official score report until you're accepted. On the Common App, the coalition using Score, you just put in your scores, what test dates, and then when you're accepted, they ask for the official ones. And you can't lie because that would disqualify you. SAT, I mentioned, is going digital. That affects sophomores, not you guys. What does it mean for you? Find the score. They don't care. SAT, ACT, find the one where you're stronger. Go with that one. Ideally, plan on 3 tests. Most kids take it because of super scoring, but the third test will have your best super score. And testing is typically when you're a junior. Some kids wait some this summer, but ideally you're going to be knocking this thing down right about now. Looking at tests in March and then May and June. Yeah, summer testing also. And waiting until you're a senior doesn't really pan out. What matters is taking it 3 times, not waiting until you're a senior. So there is no benefit that we found analyzing thousands of students for waiting until you're a senior. All right. And then I think if you're good to go, you're juniors. I'm skipping that one. So test optional. It's the law of the land. You have the option now, send scores or not. There are a few schools who require them. The Georgia flagships, UGA, Tech, MIT, Purdue, a handful, military academies, all the Florida schools. But that's it. It's not a bunch of schools just yet. More will come back, and more will come back from the South. Maybe UNC, maybe Alabama, maybe UVA, but Texas. But we're waiting on those. But test optional does not mean test blind. If you have good scores, they can be a real factor. Test optional, again, it's the lion's share of schools, 3/4. And about, almost 2/3 of those are going to lock in for a permanent decision. They'll be announcing those over time. But there aren't that many who are blind. It's going to be about 5%, 10% of schools we test blind. But the rest of them, it's going to be optional, and a small number will be test required. So here, I mentioned the test optional popped those rates. When you're applying to schools that are more selective, the more kids send test scores, because again, they're trying to stand out. That makes total sense. Also, if you're applying to an engineering program or business or a STEM program, more kids send test scores to showcase their math skills. And then a lot more than kids applying gen ed or social work or psych or so forth. There's something called, it's conditional test optional, where if you have a certain GPA, we don't need testing, Auburn. But if you have a 3.5, I want to see a test score. And they encourage it. So part of it's their language. If it's really test optional, or they encourage it, they're making room. But again, many schools, you can see, kind of read their language, what they actually want. And then some schools, if you don't have a test score, then they really want to see performance on your AP exams or IBs. Can I see some 4 and 5s? If I see a string of 4s and 5s, then maybe there's less pressure on the SAT or ACT. So it's test flexible in that regard. And part of it is college like Purdue just recently announced this summer, where test required. What you don't want to have happen is your kid has no testing. And then in August, a school comes out and says, now we're test required. And then you're like, wait a minute, I didn't prep for this. That can happen and has happened. MIT just turned theirs on, Purdue turned it on. They make their decisions when they want to. So it's good to have a score in your back pocket, whether or not you plan to use it, in case the schools you're looking at require them. And again, less data. I mentioned without testing is a little bit harder. It's harder for kids to figure out where should I apply, because scores are now skewed. When scores went optional, you kind of chopped off the lower quarter of bad test scores, which made the average score increase. They're skewing to the right now. But the big question you may ask is, does the test scores confer an advantage? Well, here's an extreme example. BC, their acceptance rate with test scores is 29%. The acceptance rate without test scores, 11%. That's about 3x. That's extreme, but it's an example. And here are these. I actually pulled the majority of these myself with my colleague Peter on the other side. We went through their websites. This is not publicly facing very often, but we were able to back things out and plug in data. UVA is admitting kids almost 2-to-1. Notre Dame 2-to-1. BC more than 2-to-1. There's an advantage. Essentially everywhere there's an advantage. Part of it is the kids who are seeing test scores are the ones seeing good test scores. On average, kids with good test scores also tend to have better GPA and academic rigor. That's collinearity. But there is it's correlation. There is causality, though. When you have two kids, similar academic course taking similar rigor, one kid sends a 34 ACT, one kid has no testing, there is an advantage. And we've had admissions officers say, yeah, that 34 becomes part of their application. The absence doesn't rule you out, but the 34 is a plus factor. The same as, having more rigor, other things. So don't think that test optional means test blind. Those are very, very, very different policies. So should you send your test scores in? Well, half of the kids in the country are, half of them are not. More males are because of the STEM and engineering and so forth. Most kids are being, they're using strategy, right? I have a test score, let's say a 32 AC score, and I'm applying 10 schools. I'm going to send that 32 to 6 schools, but not to these 4. I'm going to withhold it from Yale. I'm going to withhold it from Stanford. I'm going to send it to Georgia. I'm going to send it to USC. Tulane, I may withhold. It depends on the major, among other things, but it's strategy. I send to these, I withhold from these. And then the question is, is it going to communicate strength? Will it affect merit-based aid or placement? Will it show my ability level in a certain course as a part of, the narrative I'm trying to weave? And it also may depend on your GPA. If my grades are just ridiculous, and I have great rigor, amazing grades, my test scores are modest, withhold the test scores. But my grades, let's say I have that 3.6, not a 3.9. But I have good testing, send your testing. So be mindful of that. Also, sectional scores. Let's say I'm applying to a STEM program. I'm a little bit under that middle 50, but I have a 790 in math and a 610, let's say, in verbal. But that math score, I want to be an engineer. get that 790 there. Make sure someone there sees it, even though you're below the total with your weaker verbal. And then treat every school differently. You get to choose which on the Common App or Coalition, I'm going to send to you, withhold from you. It's all strategy. Again, STEM and business, it may matter more. Jess Selingo, author, colleague. Jamie Hansard, a colleague friend, said, look at the profile. If you're below the middle 50, only send it. If you really want to, if you think it'll add value, the bottom quartile, withhold it. Rick Clark, colleague, friend, author, said upper half, send it. Lower half, it depends. Bottom quartile, I probably wouldn't send it, he said. That's from Rick. One example, just to give you numbers, Swarthmore, their middle 50 is 1380 to 1540. So if I'm above 1470, send it all the time. Send it. It's a good score. Below 1380, the only reason I want to send that score is if I'm from a region where they get nobody, they yield no one, or they have so many fewer kids applying. Let's say I'm applying from West Virginia, and so a 1380 is actually decent from my county, because on average, kids in my, the average test score is like a 1050. Then that's compelling, but again, it's knowing your geography, knowing your zip code. Or again, if a 1460 is different than a 1380. So if I have middle grades, I would send a 1460. I wouldn't send 1380. And so it's being mindful of where you fit, how good your grades are, and so forth. And then test scores also have shifted up a little bit. Here's an example. Look at Georgia. They were test required in 2020. So their middle 50 was a 1220 to a 1390. Then the next year, the pandemic year, no test scores. They were test optional. Look at the averages. They went hard skew, hard kurtosis to the right. But then their test required last year. Now things are back to higher, but still more normal than where they were in the optional year. Here, I pulled all these on a common data set, looking at how the scores changed. Emory, they popped 40 points, test optional. Colgate popped, everyone popped a little bit. And Yale just barely, they were always so high. Tulane, a little bit. Michigan, Ohio State, they dropped a little bit. So, but on average, scores are picking up around 30 points on the low end and roughly 20 or so on the high end. Next steps by grade your juniors. This is the big year. This is the hard year. Your juniors, it matters. Balancing life, you got to piece that out of the way. Figuring out your testing, SAT, ACT. If you need help with a practice test, that's what we do for a living. Helping, looking at financial aid, doing college visits, doing your research, getting ready, building a list. Maybe you're starting to work with a independent consultant, or you're working closely with your school counselors. You're doing your homework because you're going to be applying in the fall. That's coming up sooner than you think. When you're a senior, you don't want to blow off your grade. Your grades don't matter until you're accepted. Leaving legacy, choosing your school wisely, thanking people, and watching deadlines and dates. The things that we do three things: academic tutoring, test prep, and EF coaching, helping kids get organized, whether it's in high school or in college. And so if you need help with these things, what we do, Peter, pull up the poll for a minute. Everyone, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to fill out 3 questions. It'll take you all of 15 seconds, 20 seconds. We're going to launch a little poll. Are you a student tonight? Are you a parent? Are you a teacher? Tell us who you are. If you are, where are you in the process? Most of you should be juniors, I'm assuming. And do you need any help? And if so, do you want someone to reach out? Because this is what we do for a living. And we are very happy to help any way we can, talk things through. If you need help finding an independent consultant, we'll help put you in touch with that. And that's us. So let us shift now. It is 9 o'clock. I went through so many slides so quickly. That was something. All right, now let's shift over to Q&A. And I'm going to open things up. I already have 4 questions. And let me blow it up. Here we go. Can you apply a restricted early action and early decision at the same time? With those schools, the Harvard, Yale, Princeton, they're saying if you apply to us, you're applying to us. So it's not binding, it's not early decision, but you can only apply to us in your flagship school. You can't apply to Harvard early action and then Tulane early decision. So they restrict it in that regard. I've heard that if you need to, but you know what? There may be schools who I can't say for all 2,500. I'm saying for those top schools that they really lock you in. So in that regard, I'm going to put a big caveat. I'm not certain because there are several thousand schools out there. Some of them may let you restrict and also apply ED, but I don't know. Because part of it, early decision, You're saying I'm applying to you. If you let me in, I'm in. So I doubt it. Maybe talk to your counselor and find out, because there are schools that is kind of maybe stretching my knowledge there. I've heard that if you need some serious financial aid, don't bother applying ED, because either the need will remove you from consideration, or if it's need blind, the financial aid package would be minimal. Not necessarily. Some people I've seen get very substantial aid packages, early decision, depends. I do know that it tends to skew, it's kind of bimodal. It's like a barbell where you have a bunch of affluent folks, full pay kids applying ED. There's also a lot of big need kids applying ED. So it's like the squeeze is in the middle, where people really need a good financial aid offer. And that's why they're going to cast their net a little wider to see what's out there. But it's not, don't bother. I would say if you are in love with the school and you're on profile or close, and you really want to go there, you apply ED. And if the money's not there, then you go somewhere else. But sometimes they could offer you a grant, whether it's need-based, whether it's merit-based, and to find out that they offer merit. If it's only need-based, do the net price calculator, find out, given my income level. And those programs, they use the profile or institutional methodology beyond the FAFSA, where they're going to be digging into your assets, your kids' assets. It's income plus assets. That really is not captured typically in the net price calculator. If you have $1 million or a privately held business, they're gonna factor all that in. Though the private schools really dig deep. They want to know every dollar you have. What is the restricted early action rate at Stanford versus the regular session? I don't necessarily know that. You can probably Google that and find it. But I'm certain it's going to be your odds are better early action at Stanford than regular session. They're so minimal regular. Okay, how do kids show attention and love? You show up, you interact, you engage, you flash your badge at the college fair, you get on their mailing list, you open them, you interact with the admissions officer who came to your school, you go and do a visit. And it only becomes a real visit when you show up on campus, you sign in at the admissions office. Going to a party weekend, that's not showing them love. It's really showing them I'm paying attention to you. Thank you so much, Erica. My pleasure. What's your flagship? Our flagships, the state flagships. So there are 20 schools in the Georgia system, but that includes, we have Valdosta, we have all these schools. The flagships are leading the flag in the front, the vanguard. They're going to be the UGA, and Tech. So those are the most competitive selected schools. Same as in Virginia, we have UVA and VA Tech. Then there's many other schools in Virginia, but the flagships are the very Texas. UT Austin is the flagship. There are many schools in the Texas state system. Same thing with UC. Like the flagship schools in that system, you're going to have UC Berkeley, UCLA. There's also UC Merced and UC Riverside, but the flagships are much more selective in the very front. My son doesn't want to take a test. He wants to choose based on his pre-ACT and PSAT results. Is that okay? The answer is yes. Plug those in, compare them, totally fine. Those, in my mind, are pre-tests. Do Ivies offer merit scholarships? No, they don't. They offer need-based, but not merit-based. So if you're loaded and you're applying to an Ivy League school, they're going to squeeze every dollar. They don't do merit-based aid. All right. Will this recorded set? And they definitely, they give a lot of aid, and they don't gap. They meet your full need, but they balance out the number of full pay kids with those high need kids. That they're very thoughtful. And so for every high need kid, they need a full pay, or because again, they're trying to manage their discount rate. They can't have a C. And as they're trying to become more accessible, more open, they're bringing in more first gen kids. They got to balance that. Either it's massive alumni giving, or full pay kids if they're more tuition dependent, or they need to balance things out. Will this be posted online? Yes, this will be posted online. Okay. Are there any more questions? I'm happy to answer them. And again, if you need help in any way, we can help you with academically, test prep, that's us. If you need help with the application, those are our friends, the IECs. We work with many of them. Okay. I think that may be it. All right. Well, if you need us, and we're here, we're happy to help you guys. Thanks for coming out. Oh, I have one more question. As a high school junior, how appealing is straight unweighted A's in dominantly IB classes? Dude, if you're in dominantly IB classes, if you're going for the IB diploma, a straight, straight unweighted A's are rock solid. An IB diploma is every bit as impressive as an AP scholar. IBs are respected. They really showcase critical thinking skills and writing skills. Colleges love IB, IB. So if you're getting unweighted A's, good for you. You're rocking it. Keep it going. All right. Yeah, man, you're cooking with gas. All right. Which I found out the phrase "cooking with gas" was endorsed by the gas industry, and they paid comedians to say "cooking with gas" on their shows to make that a phrase to counter the electric stove industry. It's pretty amazing. I have now bought into their marketing. I'm doing their PR for them. Can you mention your test prep offerings? Yeah. We do private tutoring. We do group classes. We do online classes. We do small groups of 6, groups of 18. We have a whole package, a whole gamut. And we also have an online self-paced option for a few $100s where you prep at your own pace with our materials. So we have a whole range based on your needs and your scores. If you want, send info at Applerouth. We'll call you tomorrow or the next day. If you need help with the scores, we're happy to. How much does sports matter? Being a marginal athlete. Being a marginal athlete is like being great at video games. Doesn't really make a difference. It shows them you join a club team, you're going to interact some, but it's being a recruited athlete night and day. Different things entirely. That lower threshold of grades used to be scores. They're going to, if you're a recruited athlete, talking to coaches, they're watching your tapes, they're calling you out there for recruiting events. It's a huge deal. And I've seen kids get into very, very outstanding schools. The grades are okay, but they had a real talent the school wanted. So they serve institutional priority. If you're a marginal athlete, I was a high school wrestler, I was varsity, we went state, I wasn't going to wrestle at Penn. And so it was something I listed. It showed I was there for 4 years, and I was, I showed commitment, but it was just one of my activities. So my real depth I was going to bring to them was musical theater and so forth. How do you become a recruited athlete? You're going to showcases, you're going to activities, events, you're where the coaches are, you're sending in your tapes, you're talking to your coach. How do I get recruited? Am I at the level? And then there's a whole thing of Div 1, Div 2, where there's scholarship money. But even I have plenty of people going Div 3 because they couldn't get in otherwise, but they're using their athletics. I played lacrosse or field hockey, or I do whatever I'm doing, I can become a Div 3 recruited athlete. But there's no money, but I don't care about the money. I'm just trying to get in. And so I'm a swimmer, I'm a diver, but there's not, it's not a Div 1, Div 2. There's no money there. But it's talk to your coach, and you have to really excel, and you have to be really strong. I have a number of people in my family who are playing at really good schools, and they're recruited athletes, and it's helping pay for school. They're either on a partial scholarship or on a full scholarship, Div 2 schools and Div 1 and so forth. All right. What's the average increase with test prep? I know that can be a great challenge. Best guess. Well, on the ACT, our kids are picking up around 5 points on the ACT. So going from a 28 to a 33, there's a range. On the SAT, it's around 120 points. So they're going from, 1150 to 1270 or 13 to 1420 average. So again, there's a range. Some kids are going more, some kids are going less. That's average. And there's a whole spectrum of how much prep kids are doing, how intensively they're working, and so forth. But we do what we do, and we have a lot of great tutors, and we're ready to work. All right, the chat. Okay, 9:09. All right, y'all. Well, there'll be more webinars coming up. If you have sophomores, I'll be talking a lot more about this digital SAT coming up. I talk about executive functioning a lot. That's kind of my thing. I work with kids even right now in high school and college. We talk about motivation, procrastination, test anxiety in general. So look for more of our webinars. Thanks for being here. And if this was good, please share the recording with friends. And thanks for coming out, y'all. Everyone have a good night.